Hi there and welcome back to this beginner's guide, music direction in musical theatre. Now, a few weeks ago I had a message from Heidi Cooper, and Heidi said that although she had MD'd a couple of shows, she has now taken on a production that requires her to MD from the piano. And did I have any tips on this subject? Now, doing such a thing isn't as easy as it first seems. So here's a few tips then on ensuring that you're still clear in your cueing and conducting from the keyboard. The orchestration of your musical is very likely to have been taken from the original production. But with more modern shows these days, bands are becoming smaller and smaller, no doubt for reasons of economics. In a previous video, I mentioned that it would be advantageous if a music director was able to play the piano, and I do know some that don't. But it's becoming more and more popular now, and for these economic reasons, the MD is being required to do their thing from the piano. So let's have a look at what we need to prepare for. I've talked a lot about preparation previously, ensuring that you've done your research into the production, prepared and marked your score, and practiced ready for your first rehearsal. If you were to conduct from the keyboard, however, there is now another level of preparation you need to plan for. If you're going to be conducting from the piano or keyboard, then you're very likely to have been taking rehearsals from the keyboard. So doing this initial preparation is not something you can hold off until you're in front of the band. The very act of taking rehearsals from the keyboard means that you will already have a good grip of the score, insofar as you will have learnt it in such a way as not to be having your head in the book all the time while you're giving cues to your company. You will have been using your mouth, your head, to mouth the words, to cue people without even knowing it. It will be exactly the same when cueing your company when you get to the theatre. You will have been using your eyes looking directly at the soloist. You will have been using your mouth to mime the lyric, using your general facial expressions to give a clear signal that the cue is approaching, etc. However, when you get to the theatre or venue and you have the band in front of you, then you need to be prepared to give not only these types of cues, but also directing, conducting, dictating tempo, cueing the band members, and so on. And of course, count-ins. So how do we do that? Firstly, we need to ensure that all band members have a clear line of sight to you, the MD, in your sitting at the keyboard position. Now, that might sound obvious, but in some crowded, tight spaces we sometimes come across in theatre orchestra pits, it's sometimes the case that if the musician can just see the baton, that will suffice. But in this case, you need to see you, your head, clearly, and of course still have enough room to play. So think about your band's positioning to ensure this. Secondly, we need to do a little examination of the score and to identify which areas of the score you can conduct and or cue with your hands, and which areas you will need both hands on your piano. Well-written music parts would have taken this into consideration, but don't rely on it. Examine the score and identify those areas where it may be a loud passage, for instance, and therefore unlikely that the passage needs your keyboard or piano playing as well. If you've identified a passage where you don't need to play, then that's easy. You conduct in the normal manner. But if you need one or two hands on the keyboard, we need to do some practicing. Take a passage like this, for instance, and try to conduct with your right hand and play the bass line with your left. Here's another example. Try conducting with your left while playing with your right. You get the idea. The second one is much harder, yes, perhaps because you're right-handed. Here are a couple more. This one in 3/4 time. When you get a moment, go back, pause the video and have a go. And this final one using triplets. The more you practice these ambidextrous type moves, the easier it will become to use these techniques when you need them. Once the tempo is established, of course, you don't need to conduct further, so it's not the case that you would need to do this constantly. You will, however, need to use this technique more where passages of music become slower or get faster. Let's now take a look at count-ins and starting a number from the keyboard if you have to play at the same time. Slower numbers are easier because you have time to conduct, obviously, and play. So, for example, 2, 3, 4, and so on. When starting a number and you need to play from bar 1 that's slightly quicker, then I find it's best to mouth the counting. So, you would prepare the musicians in the normal way, prepare to play yourself and go, or whatever. What is also useful and a technique that will give added clarity to your requirements to your musicians, as well as counting by mouthing the count, use your head in a manner you would do to copy if you were conducting. For instance, 2, 3, 4. And so on. These cues are sometimes called on the nod cues. Using head cues are also required when a passage of music needs to slow down at a rall or a rit, for instance. Or when things speeden up, for instance. Using many head cues in your score can be quite uncomfortable, if not exhausting, and I find it much easier and more comfortable and less likely to give you a headache if you beat on the upbeat rather than the downbeat with your head. In fact, you may have seen me doing this already. Let me demonstrate. Try to avoid beating 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll soon get a headache. I find it much more comfortable to try this. And so on and so forth. You may need to explain this to your band in these instances. You will, of course, end up using all these different techniques, sometimes without even realizing it. A combination of your eyes, your mouth, your general facial expression, what you do with your right hand, what you do with your left hand, your head, whether it's side by side or up and down, your general demeanor when you're about to start to play will give the signal. Whatever works best for you in any particular cue, mark it in your score and ensure you are consistent. Your musicians will soon get used to the specific cue if every time you cue it in exactly the same manner. And one final tip, try and avoid to be too clever and as the keyboard player as well as the band leader or conductor, avoid using numerous patch changes. Keyboard 1 conductor parts are usually limited to 2 or 3 patches. If you're writing your own arrangements though, keep patch changes to a minimum. Trust me, with a band and a company in front of you, you'll have enough to think about. See you next time.